There's a pier in Nassau that isn't on any map because it's not built for ships. It's built for returns. August 1717. The sea is too still. The air reeks of tar and wet wood, and a body in sailcloth bumps the sand like unwanted cargo. No priest, no marker, just a dockside voice saying it with the calm of paperwork. He went to Davy Jones. That's the problem. The name doesn't land like a ghost story. It lands like a rule. And rules are how you govern men who live where law can't follow. Davy Jones isn't just folklore. He's a survival technology, a way to explain death without witnesses, to enforce discipline, and to decide what the ocean is allowed to take. In this episode, we trace the evidence, from Nassau's pirate republic on the eve of the king's pardon, through pirate articles, admiralty records, and the earliest printed mentions, until the locker stops sounding like myth and starts reading like a legal afterlife. Nassau had more than 20 vessels anchored in the roadstead that August, some under black flags, most under no flags at all. The fort at the harbor entrance was half collapsed. The docks smelled of pine tar and salt, the planking soft from tropical rain. The harbor sat still, not peacefully still, the kind of still that follows news that hasn't officially arrived yet. On September 5th, King George I signed a general act of pardon in London. A copy arrived from Port Royal weeks later, water-damaged and incomplete. Captains read it in separate rooms. Some counted the deadline from the day of signing. Others held it ran from the date of colonial publication, a difference of several months. The records suggest no clarification was ever sent. That gap mattered. In those months, raids continued, cargo changed hands, and ships were taken in harbors that, by one reading, already operated under the pardon's terms. A colonial provisioner, who for years had supplied the harbor with powder and salt meat well outside the Nassau Customs Register, received a letter from Bristol. 3 of his ships had not arrived. Caribbean routes were frozen. By morning, he would be writing to the colonial governor requesting naval protection. He had built his livelihood in the margin between law and piracy. Now he chose. The body in the sailcloth sank without ceremony. The harbor returned to its morning noise, barrels rolling, rigging scraping, a signal gun passed the eastern channel. Nobody asked where the dead man had been from. The name said everything. The body in sailcloth disappears under the water. Someone on the dock says the name quietly, Davy Jones. Just like that. No elaboration, as though every man in the harbor had known it their whole lives. But where did it come from? Who was Davy Jones? And where did he exist before he ended up at the bottom of the sea? Bristol's Admiralty journals log at least 4 men named David Jones between 1665 and 1710. 1. A mate who vanished with his vessel off Cape Hatteras. 1. A Thames tavern keeper who went bankrupt and left no further record. 1. A sailor executed in Plymouth for mutiny in 1698. 1. A privateer officer killed in an East India Company engagement near the Strait of Malacca. No single man fits the legend completely. Each fits it partially. The clerks never connected these entries. Different registries, different years, different jurisdictions. The name was plural before it was mythic. In the Admiralty offices themselves, narrow rooms, ledger pages written in ink that spread where the parchment was damp. Entries made by men recording deaths the way a merchant records inventory. Mold, dried salt, tallow candles. Outside, rope against timber, load calls, the harbor working without pause. In Swansea, on the Welsh coast, Jones is so common a surname, it means nothing and everything simultaneously. Davy Jones, David Jones, is the name of no one in particular, free to become anyone. In Welsh seafaring tradition, Jones carries the shadow of Jonah, and a Jonah aboard ship means misfortune. One early glossary lists Ghost of Jonah as the earliest recorded equivalent. The name traveled from Welsh ports to Bristol to the Atlantic trade routes before anyone wrote it down. Nassau, 1717. A condemned pirate speaks before hanging. He says he is going to Davy Jones. The governor's secretary records it in the execution protocol as quotation, not superstition. By 1726, Daniel Defoe uses the name in print without definition. He assumes his reader already knows. The myth arrived in print fully formed. It was never invented. It accumulated, port by port, until it was heavier than any man who first carried it. The name is established. The identity, not. But that turns out to be the point. Davy Jones needed no biography. He needed jurisdiction. And jurisdiction over the dead was something pirates had already worked out in careful detail, written, signed, and witnessed, long before they needed a name for it. The name is established. The identity? Not. But the point was never the identity. Every hell has a hierarchy, and pirates had their own laws for the dead, no less detailed than for the living. Where does the pirate code end? And where does the locker's code begin? Article 8 of Bartholomew Roberts' Ship Articles, 1719. A man killed in action, his share redistributed among the surviving crew. The body prepared according to established procedure. Sailcloth, a final stitch through the nose to confirm death, a cannonball lashed at the feet. An older sailor from Bristol watched the water and said nothing. That evening, he refused his rum ration. The others noticed. No one asked why. This was not grief, it was contract. 30 men standing on deck in silence while the body went over the rail. They were not required to stand. They stood because each of them understood. The next man in sailcloth might be him. The ritual wasn't honor paid to the dead. It was a covenant between the living. Then the captain searched the dead man's bunk. Hidden coins, a small piece of silver, items that, per the articles, should have been declared to the common fund at the voyage's start. Theft from every man on board. Under the code, betrayal. Half the crew said no ceremony for a traitor. Let him go to the locker without so much as a word. The other half said, the ritual isn't for him, it's for us. The captain decided in front of the full crew. On a ship, there are no private decisions. At Port Royal, Admiralty Judge Sir Nicholas Laws reviewed confiscated pirate articles from several captured crews. He was searching for evidence of criminal conspiracy. He found compensation schedules for battlefield wounds. Right hand, 600 pieces of 8. Left hand, 500. Right eye, 100. He found voting procedures. He found a detailed protocol governing death. One of his clerks wrote in the margin, more organized than His Majesty's vessels. Laws struck it out. The archive kept it. 3 iron cages hung at the Nassau harbor entrance since December 1718, bodies swinging in the wind above the channel. Not buried, not at sea. Neither in the locker nor anywhere else with a name. They occupied the space between all worlds at once. The ocean gave the dead somewhere to go. The cage left them nowhere at all. Every sailor making port in Nassau understood, without being told, which fate was worse. The ritual was performed. The body is at sea, the article fulfilled. But there are ships where no ritual was ever performed, where an entire crew went to the locker at once, without witnesses, without sailcloth, without a final stitch. Those ships, they say, did not disappear. They kept sailing. What is a ghost ship, really? And which ships did the locker take without returning anyone? VOC Captain Bernard Fokke was the fastest sailor of his era, known for record crossings between the Netherlands and Java. His crew said he had made a deal with the devil. His directors said he chose a dangerous route. In 1641, his vessel disappeared near the Cape in a storm. No bodies, no wreckage, only a single distress cannon, heard by one ship in the bay. Then silence. 20 years later, a sailor who survived a different storm in those same waters reported seeing a vessel, VOC flag, running lights burning, no sound from the crew. Others picked up the story. The myth began accumulating details faster than facts could keep pace. Queen Anne's Revenge ran aground on a calm June day in 1718, not in a storm, not under fire. Some witnesses later testified that Blackbeard grounded her deliberately. He needed to strand 200 men before slipping away to negotiate the king's pardon on his own terms. He transferred to a small sloop and was offshore within hours. His former lieutenant, David Harriet, gave written testimony to the Admiralty Court. The ship was entered in the register as lost. Among port sailors, the word was different. He left them in the locker, and they meant living men, not dead ones. At Cape Coast Castle in February 1722, The Admiralty condemned 52 of Bartholomew Roberts' crew to hang. Bodies were displayed in iron cages above the harbor. The Crown intended deterrence. What spread through trading ports instead was a different account. Their souls were already taken by Davy Jones in the battle. The cages held nothing that mattered. The instrument of state authority had become, in the taverns and on the docks, evidence for a myth the state had never officially endorsed. A VOC clerk in Cape Town recorded the losses of May 1737 in a neat, unhurried hand. Epen Road, lost. Flora, lost. Padenburg, lost. 8 entries in sequence. Then, an ink blot. He left it uncorrected. The iron cage above the harbor is not the locker, but the distance between them is narrowing. The Admiralty is beginning to understand something the pirates already knew. Fear, properly aimed, is the most efficient fleet in any navy. The iron cage above the water is not the locker, but the Admiralty is beginning to understand. Myth and the machinery of power can work together. If a sailor fears Davy Jones more than the gallows, make the gallows Davy Jones. And then fear becomes a weapon of the state. Woodes Rogers arrived in Nassau on July 24, 1718, with a Crown commission: destroy piracy by all lawful means. The phrase carried more weight in the colonies than it did in London, and Rogers understood that better than the Admiralty. Within hours, Charles Vane set a captured French sloop on fire, drove it bow first into the anchored fleet as cover, and punched through the Eastern Channel before any response was possible. Nassau was officially pacified. Vane was already in open water. His escape reached London before Rogers's own dispatch, claiming victory. The Crown's response was methodical. December 1718, 8 men hanged at Nassau. Among them, John Augur, who had accepted Rogers' pardon in writing 3 months earlier, signed the document and returned to sea. The governor's office drafted the announcement twice. The first version called him a traitor. The second said he had violated the terms. The second went to press. The difference was a single word. The precedent was not small. Execution dock, Wapping, early tide. The condemned man was lowered into the Thames 3 times. Admiralty jurisdiction demanded it. Maritime death requiring maritime confirmation. Each submersion. A pause, the sound of water. The crowd watching. The third time, no one looked away. Symbol and statute occupied the same gesture. Nobody named Davy Jones aloud. Nobody needed to. In October 1720, Calico Jack Rackham was hanged at Port Royal before a large public crowd. 3 merchant vessels fitting out for licensed privateer voyages quietly deferred departure. The port notary recorded, delayed for technical reasons. No reason specified. No protests. The docks simply slowed. Anne Bonny and Mary Red, convicted with Rackham's crew, avoided execution. Each pleaded pregnancy. The court entered. Sentence deferred. Both records remain open in the register. No closing notation. What became of them is absent from the documents. The General Act Against Piracy, 1721, gave colonial administrators who had long traded with pirates a new vocabulary to reclassify old arrangements. Several governors used it precisely that way. The ambiguity was not a drafting failure. It was the instrument. The locker now had a letterhead. The Admiralty opens the cages. Bodies fall into water or remain in iron. But Davy Jones goes nowhere. Fear, once named, does not die with those who feared it. It moves, mouth to mouth, port to port, age to age. The golden age of piracy is ending. What survives it is the question. Between 1722 and 1730, the last large pirate formations were broken. Routes were sealed. Governors were made answerable to London. Nassau, which in 1717 had more than 20 vessels under black flags, had by 1725 a functioning customs register, a garrison, and a harbor that looked like any other British colonial port. The tavern near the ruined fort was still open. Fewer men came. They talked differently. In 1724, a book appeared in London under the name Captain Charles Johnson, A General History of the Pirates. The author's identity was never established. Johnson is a clear pseudonym. possibly Defoe, possibly someone else. The text contained names, dates, locations, and quotations. Some were verifiable against Admiralty records, some were not. Readers made no distinction. The book became the first mass archive of the era, and the first place where Davy Jones sat alongside Blackbeard, Roberts, and Vane as an equal among the documented dead. Booksellers on Fleet Street pressed a third edition before the second was sold out. No one in the trade asked who Charles Johnson actually was. The name was as useful as any other. By 1751, Tobias Smollett used the name in Peregrine Pickle, not in a scene of drowning, but in passing, as a joke. A character says it lightly. That moment marks a threshold. A name that had governed real fear in real harbors could now make a reader laugh. It hadn't lost power. It had changed form. When a word enters comedy, it has entered the language permanently. The sailors who first set it in Nassau's harbor in 1717 would not have recognized that as a rival. But that is what it was. In Bristol in the 1730s, two sailors share a night watch on a merchant vessel. One old, one young. The old man sailed into Nassau in 1718 and saw the cages over the channel. The young one knows the name only from a tavern story his uncle told. They use it the same way. Neither notices the difference. That is how a myth completes itself, not when everyone believes it, but when no one remembers a time before it. In Nassau, a woman still walks to the end of the dock each morning. Her husband has been gone more than 8 years. She has no body, no document, no record. She counts the arriving ships and has not stopped. The harbor around her is orderly now, registered, administered, lit at night. The myth has no address here anymore. It left with the men who carried it. It is somewhere on the Atlantic at this moment, in the mouth of a sailor who learned it from a sailor who was there, crossing water that has no bottom anyone has ever measured, toward a port that will hear the name tonight for the first time.